Pamela Haynes was born in 1958 in the peaceful town of Stillwater, Minnesota, into a loving, tight-knit family on a dairy farm. The second youngest of 8 siblings, she grew up surrounded by the values of hard work, simplicity, and deep familial bonds. But as Pamela grew older, her heart yearned for more than the boundaries of rural life could offer. At the age of 25, driven by a desire to explore the world and serve her country, she made the life-altering decision to join the United States Navy. In May 1984, Pamela left Minnesota and began training at the Orlando Naval Training Center in Central Florida. Her upbringing on the family farm had prepared her well. Her discipline and determination helped her succeed during the demanding 2-month training program. On August 3, 1984, she proudly graduated from the Navy Training Center, ready to begin a new chapter in her life. But that chapter never came. On August 4, just one day after her graduation, Pamela disappeared. She was last seen shopping at the Fashion Square Mall in Orlando, where she bought makeup and toiletries from a Kmart. Investigators later found a receipt, timestamped at 3:18 p.m., providing a vital clue to her final movements. That evening, witnesses reported seeing her walking near the naval base with an unidentified man between 6:30 and 7 p.m. The two were later seen at Club Mariner, a bar located on the Navy base. The man's identity remained unknown, a haunting mystery that complicated the case from the very beginning. The next morning, August 5th, Pamela's lifeless, partially clothed body was found in front of a vacant home on Riverview Avenue in Sanford, Florida. Evidence suggested she had been killed elsewhere and her body callously dumped. At the crime scene, investigators found another receipt, this one showing a purchase made at 1:09 a.m., believed to be from a Chinese restaurant. The receipt held no identifying details, but it deepened the mystery surrounding her final hours. Pamela's brutal death devastated her family and stunned investigators. Given the proximity of the crime scene to the naval base, detectives believed the killer might be connected to the military. But despite tireless efforts by the Seminole County Sheriff's Department, no solid leads emerged. The case remained cold for over 3 decades. Through all those years, Pamela's family held on to hope. They endured false starts, painful delays, and long silences, but they never stopped fighting for justice. In 2019, that hope was finally rewarded, thanks to advancements in forensic technology and the use of public genealogy databases like GEDmatch. Investigators built a DNA family tree that led them to Thomas Lewis Garner. Garner, a 59-year-old dental hygienist who had worked at the Orlando Naval Training Center during the same period as Pamela, became the prime suspect. Detectives collected a discarded item from Garner to obtain his DNA, which matched the evidence recovered from the 1984 crime scene. Pamela's family, still grieving after 34 years, was invited to a meeting in Minnesota, expecting a routine update. They were stunned when investigators showed them a video of Garner's arrest in Jacksonville, Florida. It was a moment of disbelief and long-awaited justice. During the trial, Garner testified in his own defense. He admitted to the possibility of a past consensual encounter with Pamela, but denied any involvement in her murder. His defense team tried to cast doubt on the DNA evidence and presented alternative theories, but the jury was unconvinced. Garner was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Pamela Haynes' story is one of courage, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Though her life was tragically cut short, the truth eventually prevailed. Her family's unyielding determination ensured that her memory would not fade and that her killer would finally face the consequences. At the end of a protracted legal battle that spanned nearly 4 decades, Pamela Haynes' family finally witnessed a moment they had long awaited. Immediately after the verdict was read in court, Pamela's sister stood to deliver a powerful victim impact statement. Speaking on behalf of the family, she expressed a deep mix of emotions: relief, sorrow, and enduring pain. She hoped that Thomas Garner would reflect on the years he spent free, living his life, while her family lived in the shadow of grief, carrying the weight of unanswered questions. The sentencing, while offering a sense of justice, could never undo the decades of anguish they had endured. Not long after the verdict, detectives revealed that Thomas Garner was under investigation in connection with another cold case. His DNA had reportedly matched evidence from a 1982 homicide in Honolulu, involving the murder of a 25-year-old woman. While formal charges had yet to be filed, prosecutors acknowledged the possibility that Garner could be linked to additional unsolved crimes. The disturbing revelation raised suspicions that he might be a serial offender, and law enforcement began reviewing other unsolved cases with renewed urgency. The conviction of Thomas Lewis Garner in Pamela Haynes' case was more than just a legal outcome. It was a testament to the power of persistence, evolving forensic science, and the unwavering determination of those seeking justice. Pamela's story, which began with a young woman's dream of serving her country and building a life of purpose, ended in violence, but her memory now stands as a symbol of resilience. The decades-long fight for justice is a reminder that with dedication and modern technology, even the most complex cold cases can be resolved hundreds of miles away. Another young woman's life followed a heartbreakingly similar arc. Sophie Sergi, born in 1973, was from the tiny remote village of Pitcairn Point in western Alaska, a community nestled along the Yukon River with fewer than 200 residents at the time. Pitcairn Point was home to predominantly indigenous people, and Sophie proudly belonged to the Yupik tribe. Her upbringing was shaped by the rhythms of village life, close family bonds, shared values, and a deep connection to the land and culture. In that small, tight-knit community, Sophie was known as a bright, hard-working, and compassionate individual, a role model for younger generations. From an early age, Sophie dreamed of achieving something beyond the borders of her village. Her commitment to education was unwavering. Despite the limitations of her remote upbringing, she earned a full scholarship to the University of Alaska, a remarkable achievement that required her to relocate nearly 500 miles from home. She began studying marine biology, a field that reflected her curiosity and love for the natural world. The transition from rural Alaska to the culturally diverse and academically demanding environment of the university was not easy, but Sophie adapted with determination. However, life presented new challenges. Sophie chose to take a temporary break from college. Part of her decision was driven by a desire to care for her aging mother back home. The other part was financial. She needed money for dental surgery and didn't want to place the burden on her family. Back in Pitcairn Point, she worked as a teacher's aide, continuing to give back to her community while saving up to continue her education. Her time away from school was not a detour, but a responsible and selfless step in pursuit of her long-term goals. She planned to return to college after her break, committed to completing her degree in April 1993. Sophie traveled to Fairbanks for a dental appointment, a routine trip that would tragically become her last. She planned to stay with her friend Shirley, who lived in Bartlett Hall, a dormitory on the University of Alaska Fairbanks campus. On the night of April 25th, Sophie joined friends for a movie, enjoying a normal evening that showed no signs of the tragedy to come. That evening, Sophie spent time with her friends, enjoying food and engaging in simple college activities that mirrored the lives of countless students across the country. The last known photograph of her captured a moment of pure joy, spread wide, smiling under the fading hues of a sunset during a brief excursion. It was an image that reflected her spirit, bright, open, and full of promise. Later that night, she returned with her friend Shirley to Bartlett Hall, the university dormitory. The setting was casual and relaxed, just Sophie, Shirley, and Shirley's boyfriend Noah watching movies and enjoying each other's company. At some point during the night, Sophie decided to go to the common area for a drink and later stepped out for a cigarette. Given the freezing Alaskan temperatures, Shirley suggested she use the second-floor bathroom to avoid going outside. Sophie agreed. What happened next would forever alter the lives of everyone who knew her while Sophie was gone. Shirley and Noah decided to leave, leaving a handwritten note on the door to inform Sophie of their whereabouts. They had no way of knowing that this well-meaning decision would later become a critical factor in the tragic mystery surrounding Sophie's disappearance. By the next morning, Sophie was nowhere to be found. When Shirley returned to her room, she immediately noticed that Sophie had not come back. Alarmed, she began searching and upon finding no sign of her friend, notified campus police. Meanwhile, back in Pitcairn Point, Sophie's family received a call from her orthodontist. Sophie had missed her scheduled dental appointment, a highly uncharacteristic move. As concern mounted, a janitor at Bartlett Hall made a horrifying discovery. In the second-floor bathroom, the one Sophie had gone to smoke in, he found her lifeless body in the bathtub. Sophie had been brutally attacked. The scene was horrific. She had been bound, gagged, tasered, beaten, stabbed, and shot once in the back of the head. Her body was partially unclothed, her pants and underwear pulled down, her bra and sweater pushed up, and the water in the bathtub still running, leaving her damp and exposed. The discovery sent shockwaves through the University of Alaska Fairbanks. The idea that such a brutal crime could occur within the walls of a student dormitory shattered any sense of safety students had felt. The campus was immediately locked down, and emergency emotional support services were offered to students as fear and disbelief spread. On April 26, 1993, the day after Sophie was killed, local police, forensic teams, and detectives arrived at Bartlett Hall and launched a full-scale investigation. The gravity of the crime demanded a meticulous and thorough approach. Investigators secured the entire bathroom, collecting every possible piece of evidence, fingerprints, hair samples, and other biological material. While forensic science was still limited in the early 1990s, authorities knew the importance of preserving all physical evidence, hopeful that future advancements in DNA analysis would one day offer answers. Sophie's autopsy revealed no drugs or alcohol in her system, reinforcing that she had been targeted and violently assaulted without provocation. The cruelty and calculated nature of the attack stunned everyone involved in the case. Crucial witness accounts began to provide small glimpses into that fateful night. Two students, Vanessa Allen and Jennifer Roy, came forward with disturbing memories. Vanessa, a resident of Bartlett Hall, recalled feeling uneasy that night. While entering the rarely used east side bathroom, she noticed a light on in the adjoining tub room, an unusual sight that immediately raised concern. She reported hearing strange noises, similar to firecrackers, coming from the area. Jennifer Roy, a graduating senior, had been up late studying in her room on the west side of the dorm. Around 1:30 a.m., she heard strange sounds through the bathroom's shared wall, a rustling noise, a loud thud, and faint murmuring. She described it as potentially involving a man and a woman, but couldn't be sure. These fragmented but haunting observations added to the urgency of the investigation. But the transient nature of a college campus made things more difficult. Many students had already left for the semester, and dorm rosters weren't always up to date, making it challenging for investigators to determine who had access to the bathroom or who may have been nearby at the time. As detectives followed leads and interviewed dozens of people, they began piecing together a timeline of events. The goal was clear: to uncover the identity of Sophie Sergi's killer and deliver the justice she and her devastated family deserved. Here is the rewritten version of your extended narrative. It has been crafted for clarity, emotional impact, and storytelling flow, while maintaining all the essential facts and events. The critical window between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. was when Sophie Sergi's life was violently taken. As years passed, her case slowly turned cold. Despite the devastating loss, investigators never truly let it go. With the evolution of forensic technology, especially in DNA analysis, the evidence collected from that night was eventually re-examined, reigniting hope that justice could still be served. In 2018, a breakthrough finally came. Advancements in DNA testing allowed forensic teams to extract a viable genetic profile from the preserved evidence. Investigators then turned to a revolutionary method, genealogical DNA analysis, which compares unidentified DNA to publicly available genetic databases in hopes of identifying a relative. This method, which had recently begun solving other cold cases, would prove to be a turning point in Sophie's. That genetic profile led them to a man living in Maine, Stephen H. Downs. As authorities dug deeper, they discovered that Downs had attended the University of Alaska Fairbanks and lived in Bartlett Hall at the time of Sophie's murder. When interviewed in 2019, Downs denied any connection to Sophie or the case. But DNA doesn't lie. The sample taken from Sophie's body decades earlier was a definitive match to Downs. He was arrested in Maine, where he had built a seemingly ordinary life and worked as a nurse, and then extradited to Alaska to face charges during the trial. Prosecutors presented a compelling case that detailed Downs' connection to the crime. Witnesses like Vanessa Allen and Jennifer Roy, students who had been in Bartlett Hall that night, testified about the strange and disturbing noises they heard around the time Sophie was attacked. Their memories, combined with the new forensic evidence, helped reconstruct the final hours of Sophie's life with chilling clarity. In the end, the jury found Stephen H. Downs guilty. He was sentenced to 75 years in prison for the sexual assault and murder of Sophie Sergi. For her family and friends, justice had finally been served. Yet even with closure, the emotional scars of her violent death remain. Her life, full of promise, was stolen in the most brutal way imaginable, but her legacy endures through the relentless work of investigators and transformative power of modern forensic science. The Sophie Sergi case stands as a powerful example of how determination, science, and time can converge to bring truth to light, even after nearly 30 years. Another such story is that of Jody Loomis. Born on June 5, 1952, in Salt Lake City, Utah, Jody Loomis was a compassionate and vibrant young woman, the middle child between an older brother, John, and a younger sister. Jody's childhood was filled with love and a deep connection to nature. Standing only 5'2", she possessed a bold, spirited personality, with striking blonde hair and piercing blue eyes that mirrored her passionate soul. Jody's love for animals and the outdoors shaped much of who she was. In one defining moment of her young life, she confronted hunters who were shooting pigeons, unable to stand by while innocent creatures suffered. Her act of kindness, nursing an injured bird back to health, reflected the empathy and courage that defined her character. On the evening of August 23, 1972, Jody set out on a bike ride to visit her beloved horse at a stable 6 miles from her family's home in Snohomish County, Washington. It was a ride she had made many times before, but that evening, around 5:30 p.m., a couple driving down a remote dirt road discovered Jody in the woods, partially nude and critically injured. She had been shot in the head. The couple rushed her to the hospital, but her wounds were too severe. Jody Loomis died shortly after arriving. An autopsy confirmed that she had also been sexually assaulted, adding another layer of horror to the already devastating crime. Despite a wide-reaching investigation, her case remained unsolved for decades. It wasn't until the emergence of genetic genealogy that justice for Jody would begin to take shape. Would you like me to continue with the next phase of Jody Loomis' case, including the forensic breakthrough and arrest? In the serene town of Bartow, Washington, the aftermath of Jody Loomis' murder left the community in shock. Investigators were left with the daunting task of unraveling a brutal crime that would haunt the region for decades. As was customary, suspicion first fell on those closest to the victim. Jody's fiancé Jim, who had been living with the Loomis family at the time, was quickly ruled out. Authorities confirmed he had been at work in a hospital when the tragedy occurred. Attention then turned to the Rice family. particularly Ken and his son Alan, who had been chopping wood near the location where Jody's body was found. Although the family's proximity raised questions, no conclusive evidence linked them to the crime. Frustration grew as the investigation stalled for nearly 2 years. A glimmer of hope appeared when investigators received a tip about a group associated with the Reaper's Roadmen biker gang. Rumors circulated that some members had boasted about attacking and killing a young woman. The lead was promising, especially because it involved a .22 caliber pistol, the same type used in Jody's murder. But hopes were dashed when FBI testing ruled out a connection. As the case grew colder, fear began to take root in the community. Young women were vanishing throughout Snohomish County, prompting concerns that a serial offender might be operating in the area. One suspect emerged as a particularly notorious figure in the criminal landscape of the Pacific Northwest. During that era, his crimes overlapped geographically and temporally with Jody's murder, and some of his victims bore a resemblance to her. Still, investigators eventually determined that the nature of Jody's killing did not align with his known methods. With no hard evidence to connect him to the crime, the case once again went cold. Decades later, in a renewed effort to bring justice to Jody, the Snohomish County Cold Case Unit reopened the investigation, this time armed with powerful advancements in DNA technology. However, key pieces of evidence including swabs, Jody's underwear, and the bullet had inexplicably gone missing over the years, complicating efforts to reconstruct the case. Then came a breakthrough from an unexpected source: Jody's left boot. Seemingly insignificant, this single item became critical. In 2008, forensic analysts developed a male DNA profile from the boot, reigniting the long-dormant investigation. Although a search through CODIS, the national DNA database, initially yielded no matches, the case would soon benefit from a powerful new tool: forensic genealogy. In July 2018, investigators submitted the DNA profile to Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based company specializing in genetic genealogy. By comparing the sample to public DNA databases, researchers began constructing family trees that ultimately pointed them to the Miller family. Among them, one man stood out: Terrence Miller, a retired heavy equipment operator. Miller lived just miles from the crime scene. His past was troubling. He had been convicted of lewd conduct in 1968 and accused of assaulting a preteen girl in the 1970s. Allegations of abuse against children painted a disturbing picture, intensifying suspicion in a carefully coordinated operation. Undercover officers followed Miller and recovered a coffee cup he discarded outside a local casino. Forensic analysis of the cup's contents delivered a chilling truth: the DNA was a perfect match to the sample found on Jody's boot. In April 2019, 78-year-old Terrence Miller was arrested and charged in connection with Jody Loomis's rape and murder. Despite pleading not guilty, he faced trial in late 2020. The courtroom heard 2 weeks of compelling evidence and emotional testimony as prosecutors made their case. Then, just before the jury could deliver its verdict, tragedy struck again. On November 9, 2020, Miller died by suicide at his home. Unaware of his death, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. Though Miller would never face sentencing, the decision represented a long-awaited form of justice. In December 2020, attempts to vacate the guilty verdict posthumously were rejected. A case that had lingered unresolved for nearly 50 years had finally reached its legal conclusion. The murder of Jody Loomis, once a haunting mystery, had at last been solved, but the emotional scars remained. Her story is a powerful reminder of the lasting impact of violent crimes and the unrelenting pursuit of truth by those who refuse to forget. The tragic events of August 23, 1972, will forever be etched into the collective memory of Bothell, Washington.